In this video, we're going to work a couple of examples related to simple interest. The first example reads, use the formula A equals P times the quantity 1 plus RT to find T, given that A equals $924, P equals 600, and R equals 18%. The nice thing about this example is it tells us what formula to use, so we don't have to determine what formula that we need to apply. Also notice that we're given 3 pieces of the formula and we're being asked to find T, the missing piece of information. That's a very common thing when it comes to finance problems. You'll be given all of the information except for one piece of information. And then we can use the formula and our algebra skills to solve for that missing piece. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start. So I'll begin by substituting the values that we know into the formula. So instead of A, we'll write $924. Instead of P, we'll write 600. Then we have 1 plus. Now instead of R, we want to replace R with 18%. And any time you're given R as a percent, it's important to recognize that in the formula, R represents the rate, but it represents the rate as a decimal. So to change 18% to a decimal, we move the decimal place we move the decimal point 2 places to the left. So the decimal point appears here after the 8. We'll move that 2 places to the left, and so as a decimal, 18% is 0.18. That's the value that we will replace for R in the formula. So we have 0.18, and T is the variable that we want to solve for, so I'll leave that as T in the formula. Now we begin the solving process. We have an equation here that we need to solve for T. The first thing that we need to do is distribute the 600. We distribute the 600 by multiplying 600 times each of these items inside the parentheses. So on the left side, we'll leave 924 alone. 600 times 1 is equal to 600. 600 times 0.18 T. In order to determine that term, we need to multiply 600 by 0.18, which you can do on your calculator. It equals 108. So that last term is 108 T. Now we need to isolate T on the right side of the equal sign. So next thing we'll do is we'll subtract 600 from both sides. That leaves us with 324 on the left side and 108 T on the right side. Our final step to get T by itself is to divide both sides by 108. That gives us T equals T on the right side, and when we compute 324 divided by 108 on our calculator, we get a result of 3. Remember, in the formula for simple interest, T represents a time in years, and so this represents 3 years. So what we're saying is that if we start out with a principal balance of $600 and we apply an interest rate of 18%, in 3 years that money, if accrued under a simple interest situation, will reach $924. Okay, let's do a second example. The second example reads, suppose $4,100 is borrowed. After 9 months, the future value of this amount is $4,346. Determine the loan's simple interest rate R. Round your answer to the nearest tenth of a percent. The first thing that I like to do when faced with any kind of word problem is just to jot down the information that I'm being given. So I've got 2 dollar amounts here. I have $4,100 as the amount borrowed, and I have $4,346 for the future value of the amount. So what I have here is that P equals $4,100 And the amount that it grows to is $4,346. I'm told that it takes 9 months, so I know something about the time. Now, when we talk about time, just as I mentioned before, we refer to t as being time in years. So since we're being given our time period in months, I need to translate that in terms of years. So since there are 12 months in a year, I'm going to write t as 9/12. In other words, 9 months represents 9/12 of a year. So in our formula, we will use the value of 9/12 for t. And finally, the simple interest rate r is what we don't know. So that's what we're going to try to find. Now, in the second example, we are not given the formula that we need to use to find the answer to this problem. So let's talk about how we can figure out the formula that we need to use. First of all, notice that we are being told that the money is being accrued under a simple interest rate. So we know that we need to refer to one of our simple interest formulas. Because we are given information regarding P, A, and T, and we're being asked to find R, it makes sense then that we would use the simple interest formula A equals P times 1 plus RT. That's the simple interest formula that relates all of these variables together. So, just like we did in the first example, let's go ahead and substitute the values that we know so that we can solve for what we don't know. So instead of A, I'll write 4,346. Instead of P, I'm going to write 4,100. Then I have 1 plus, in this case, R is our unknown, and T is equal to 9/12. So cleaning that up a bit, let's write 4,346, sorry about that, 4,100, and in parentheses we have 1 plus 9/12 is the same as 0.75. So instead of writing it as a fraction, let's write it as a decimal. That's kind of what we're used to. And I'm going to switch this around to read 0.75r, just because we normally like to see the number in front of the variable when we're talking about algebra. So this problem is going to follow very similarly to the first example. In order to solve for r, we want to isolate r on the right-hand side. To begin that process, we will distribute the 4,100. So that gives us 4,346 on the left side. 4,100 times 1 is equal to 4,100 plus 4,100 times 0.75, when you plug that into your calculator, should give you a result of 3,075 or $3,075, and then we just need to remember to tack that R on the end of it. So to isolate R on the right hand side, our next step is to subtract 4,100 from both sides. On the left side, that leaves us with 246. And on the right side, that leaves us with 3,075 times R. Our final step to solve for R is to divide both sides by 3,075. On the right side, that leaves us with just R, since the 3,075s cancel out. And putting 246 divided by 3,075 into your calculator should give you a result of 0.08. Just move this down a tiny bit. So let's go ahead and make sense of this value. We've got R equals 0.08 as a decimal. To change that 0.08 into a percent, which is how we typically see a rate, we move the decimal point back 2 places to the right. That means that the rate is equal to 8%. So we move the decimal point 2 places to the right and tack on a percent sign in order to state that final answer of 8%. Notice that even though the original problem asked us to round our answer, that was not necessary in this case. And then just to make sense of our whole situation here, what this basically means is that under a simple interest situation, $4,100 that's borrowed after 9 months at a simple interest rate of 8% would be, the future loan value would be $4,346.